Alright, hello everybody, welcome to our next lesson here. Today we're going to talk about Cold War conflicts in the Middle East. So our objectives and standards are to explain how the United States created tension in the Middle East and to summarize the struggle for Afghanistan during the Cold War. And take a moment there to read the standards if you would, please. And our desired result, what conflicts arose during the Cold War in the Middle East region? So both the Soviet Union and the United States were drawn to the oil-rich fields of the Middle East. Oil also created a lot of tension between Islamic traditional values and modern Western ideas. And this couldn't be more true than in places like Iran. Now, following World War II, the leader of Iran, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, accepted governments and oil companies of the Western world. Just to kind of tell you where we're talking about here, we have Iran here, so this is one of the main countries we're talking about. Over here in the white parts of the map that you get, it hasn't been identified, but we have Afghanistan. But again, this is some of the major parts that we're talking about in terms of Middle East conflicts during the Cold War. Now, many nationalists in Iran resented Western influence in the country. They want to stick to their traditional values. They don't want to follow, American or English ways of life. They want to follow their own ways of life. And these nationalists are going to unite under Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. And they're going to nationalize a British-owned oil company, meaning they took control of it and said it was now owned by Iran. The group was also able to force the Shah, or the leader, to flee in 1953. Now, fearful that the country may return to the Soviets for support, the United States assisted in restoring the Shah, and this is going to create a lot of tension by people in Iran and make them angry with the United States for restoring the Shah. During the 1950s, Iran was modernized with skyscrapers, factories, and foreign banks. However, millions of Iranians still lived in poverty. The Shah did try to limit the political influence of the Ayatollahs. The Ayatollahs were Iran's conservative Muslim leaders who wanted to stick to the traditional way of life and things like that. And they were also opposed to Western modernization, and their leader was Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Now, while living in exile, his tape-recorded messages spurred action across Iran, began to get people to support, the Ayatollahs and building support for Khomeini and also the traditional Islamic way of life. In late 1978, there were riots in almost every city in Iran, and finally in 1979 the Shah fled and Ayatollah Khomeini was returned to rule in Iran. So domestic rule under Khomeini was very strict because there was an extreme hatred in response to the United States. Remember that the United States had supported the Shah, so many people in Iran were angry at that. In 1979, with Khomeini's blessing, young Islamic revolutionaries took control of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, and there were more than 60 American hostages. It was also demanded that the United States force the Shah to have a trial because the Shah had asked to go to the United States for treatment because he had cancer. Eventually, the hostages were released after 444 days in captivity. Here's a picture of the hostages there being blindfolded, so you can see them there. Khomeini also told other Muslim radicals to overthrow their secular governments, or secular governments that maybe didn't follow traditional religious views of life. Now, this created tension between Iran and its neighbors in the Middle East. For example, Iran and Iraq actually went to war in 1980. The United States gave aid to both sides, but the Soviet Union supported Iraq. The war finally came to a ceasefire after negotiations by the United Nations in 1988, and the conflict left 1 million Iranians and Iraqis dead. So talking about Afghanistan, the country of Afghanistan had maintained its independence after World War II, but the Soviets began their influence in the region in the 1950s. There was a revolt by the Muslims against the Soviets in the 1970s in Afghanistan, which caused the Soviet Union to invade Afghanistan in 1979. Now, the Soviets believed it would support the Afghan communists, those who supported communism in Afghanistan, and then be able to withdraw, but that's not going to be the case. Afghan rebels called Mujahideen, or Holy Warriors, used weapons from the United States to fight back. I'm trying my best here with the names, but either way, they used the weapons from the United States to fight back, and weapons were supplied by the United States to defend Middle Eastern oil supplies in Afghanistan. President Jimmy Carter also had warned the Soviets against trying to take control of the Persian Gulf. In fact, President Carter also stopped grain shipments to the Soviet Union, and boycotted the 1980 Olympic Games in Moscow. By 1989, however, all Soviet forces had withdrawn from Afghanistan. Alright, so our closure here, what conflicts arose during the Cold War in the Middle East region? Think about Iran, think about Afghanistan, and that will help you answer your question. Have a great rest of your day or night, and I will talk to you soon.